Hello everyone, welcome to Trolling with Logic at our new home on Vaughan Live. It is the 31st of March 2013. It is 8:30 p.m. here in the UK, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time in America. I say we are a regular atheist, skeptic, secular show. And I said, if you do want to call in, you can call in at any point to speak to our guest or to speak to us. Just add the Skype contact Trolling with Logic and just send me a PM with a rough gist of what your question is. Please don't call the show as it just interrupts the flow and it gets on my nerves as well. By calling in, please remember you're granting us permission to use your likeness because the show is recorded and uploaded to iTunes and to YouTube. So please remember that. Also, if you can't get through today or any general questions, if you're listening to the podcast, email us contact@trollingwithlogic.com. And I think that's all the announcements out the way. So my panel today, as always, Mortimer, welcome back.
Hi, everyone.
And welcoming as well, Casey.
Hello.
And standing in for Lundy again, welcoming Jay.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, and like I said, our guest today was a former evangelical minister. He wrote the best-selling book, Losing Faith in Faith, and he's co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation and one of the founders of the Clergy Project. Well, so everyone, please welcome Dan Barker. Welcome, Dan, to the show.
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you.
Okay, and I think, Casey, you had some questions ready, so we'll hand it over to Casey.
All right. Okay, so I remember hearing this one thing. I was told by this. I remember hearing from this guy from the past show. Well, from a show when we were interviewing David Silverman. I'm not going to mention his name, but he said that atheists do what creationists do to science, except with sociology, history, and politics. Basically, when it comes like the secularizing. What do you say to that?
That atheists are using science politically rather than just intellectually? Is that what you're asking?
No, I was talking about basically, changing things up, like changing up history, sociology, and politics, because just to make religion look like it has less influence. What do you say to that?
Well, I guess to reply to that, we would need a specific example. We do know that many or most creationists do twist the facts. And it's probably true that some scientists also twist the facts for some personal reason, but the only way to know that is to have a specific example. I used to believe in creation 100%. I used to preach that evolution was bad. And then I started reading evolution and started reading science, and I was the one who was humbled. I realized I didn't really understand it. I do know there is controversy among scientists, but I doubt that in general, atheists and scientists are just rewriting history for their agenda. I wanted to believe, but I followed the facts wherever they believe, and the facts overwhelmingly support that we all evolved from common biological ancestors.
Actually, I guess that was like a bad question because the guy never really stated a specific example. He just said it. But I guess I did have this question that was bugging me. Is there truly a biblical wording on half the national buildings in the U.S.? Like, is it true that like there's like biblical wording on the national buildings? Right there and here and there in the capital.
Yeah, there is biblical wording on a lot of buildings, but not half of them. I don't think half of them. And even if there were biblical wording on all of them, what that proves is not that we are a biblically based country. What that proves is that some people have crossed the line and have inserted their personal religion onto our public buildings. Some people talk about the Ten Commandments at our Supreme Court. And it is true, there is a depiction of Moses holding some tablets with fragments of Hebrew that look like it's from the Ten Commandments in Exodus. But there's also a depiction of
Muhammad.
Muhammad holding the Quran with Arabic from the Quran. And Moses and Muhammad are not pictured prominently in any location. There is no actual English wording of the Ten Commandments, and there's no indication that the architects, whatever authority they might have had any intention of highlighting or centralizing the biblical wording of the Ten Commandments. So you'll find, like at the Jefferson Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial, you'll find select quotes, religious quotes, but that just reflects the decision of an architect or of the current Congress. It doesn't mean that our country was based on any of those teachings. There were other quotes they could have picked, but somebody decided to pick religious quotes for their own reasons.
Yeah,
Sorry, Jay has well, I'll let you ask this one, then Jay has a question after that, Casey. So one more.
all right. Well, what do you say, like, about, like, you know, those old memorials, like those World War II memorials, like with Christian iconography, like they specifically have Jesus, crosses, all of that, and not just like on the graves, like it's a cross. Would you say that, like maybe like there could also be placed in the same area, like an atheist Adam or something to represent the memorial for atheists, since, well, people would have problems taking it down?
Well, I don't think the park would be big enough for all the symbols that you would need to represent all the different religions of the people who fought in the wars. We have no problem with an individual grave of an actual person having a representation of that person's religion. It could be a Buddhist with the Buddhist wheel, or it could be the Star of David, or it could be a Christian cross if that was the religion of that person. But a general memorial to all members of the military should not have just one religious depiction on it. A general memorial should have something that's inclusive of all. And your suggestion is that we put 45 different symbols on it, which would clutter it up, which would be kind of beside the point. Better to put something universal, like maybe I don't know, maybe an eagle or something, you know, something that all Americans share in common, so that we can respect their contributions. We can honor what they gave, their lives to this country, without making some service members feel like they are not in the in crowd. They're not part of the right religion.
Jay?
Yeah, so just,
oh, sorry.
Okay, go on, Jay.
Are you there, Jay?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, you said wonderful. You said wonderful statement. How happy can you be when you think every action and thought is began monitored by judgment ghosts? When you discover this fact in you.
Oh, we lost you there, Jay. I think we lost her. I think what she was asking in regards to that quote about the judgmental ghost is when did you discover it?
Yeah, well, you know, I was a believer, and it took me 4 or 5 years after 19 years of preaching, when all of that time I thought there was a spirit and a God, a Holy Ghost. Every one of my thoughts was being monitored. Every one of my thoughts was being listened to and analyzed by God and Jesus and the angels and by demons, and the Bible talks about all that. So I was never fully alone. So you can't be truly happy. You can't really be happy if you have all this judgment. And I remember one day in 1983, I was down in a little church in Mexico, and it dawned on me as I was looking up at the stars that I was all alone in that room for the very first time. And it felt wonderful. There was no huge eyeball judging me, looking at me. It was just me in that room. It was almost like I was going to shake my own hand and say, "Hi, Dan, here's who you really are. You're not pretending to be some soul or spirit that lives on. You are just a biological animal in a natural universe. For better or for worse, whatever that means, that's who you are." And I released that monkey, that judgment, that fear of hell and judgment. And it feels very, very happy to find purpose within myself and not look for a purpose out there somewhere.
There was a question kind of last week we spoke to a lady you'll know quite well, Teresa McBain. We were speaking to her. And I was just wondering, like, from your perception, like when you deconverted, so to say, in 84, was the general climate a lot more hostile to atheists then than, say, now?
Yes, it was in 1983, 84. I don't know if the intensity was any more, but today there's a lot more acceptance of atheists and agnostics. When I came out, there was no Clergy Project.
Yeah.
There was no, I thought I was all alone.
Yeah.
I thought, you know, I never knew any other atheists. I'd never seen an atheist on TV. Obviously, I must have met some atheists, I just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Because how would you know? And that tells you something right there. If you don't know it, then they're just like anybody else. So I think today, now, especially with about almost 30% of young people are thoroughly non-religious, there's a much more accepting attitude. There's a landing place for atheists and agnostics.
Sorry, everyone.
Okay.
Internet problem as usual.
Okay, no problem, G. Marty, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a question, but are we finished with this one?
Yeah, we can carry on.
I don't want to go off topic here.
That's no problem.
But okay. I was listening to your talk that was it to the...
I think it was Secular Students.
Yeah, that Secular Students Alliance. And this thing was, you mentioned this thing about when you discovered that there were Christians who did not believe that Adam and Eve were real historical characters.
Yeah.
And where do I begin? I guess, first of all, did you not know at the time that there were Christians who didn't believe that? Was that
No.
news to you?
No, I didn't know that because I was in a certain bubble of Christianity. I was on an extreme fundamentalist, conservative type of Christian, evangelical. That's all we associated with. That's all we listened to. That's all we believed. That's all my family, all my church members and friends. And for us, Adam and Eve were real people because the Bible wouldn't lie about something like that.
Yeah.
And so I truly was shocked when my musicals started to get popular and I got invited to other types of Christian churches. I was shocked that there were people calling themselves Christians who really thought Adam and Eve were just like the parable of the prodigal son, you know, a made-up story rather than a real story. That shocked me because that, in my mind, in the fundamentalist mind, that made God a liar. The Bible says they existed and treats them, and he didn't say it's a metaphor, doesn't say it's a parable, it just tells the story. And so that really was shocking to me. I know that most Christians are not like that. And I know that my Christianity does not represent all Christians. I know we should not paint them with the same brush, but that's where I was, and that's the deep hole that I had to crawl out of.
Yeah, because what I was sort of expecting was that even the more, even the really fundamentalist Christians would still be sort of, preaching about how that group over there, they believe this and that's wrong. So you would still have heard that the belief exists, and that's what surprised me.
Well, I guess that never came up. There were a lot of things it's just not on your radar or something. We thought we heard about Christians who accepted evolution. I remember that. I'm thinking, how can they accept evolution? And I guess the Adam and Eve story would fall into that, because if you accept evolution, there could not have been an Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
But it never. I guess it takes a while for some of us to grow up, to think outside the box.
Do you think Muslims and other religions refuse the fact of science and everything because they are afraid. If you think about science as fact, they will say Allah or God lie in this point and it's not true what's in the holy book. This fear, do you think it's block their mind?
I think in Islam, it's just like Christianity. There is a variety of stances, and there are fundamentalist Muslims, just like there's fundamentalist Christians, who say, like I used to say, that ultimate truth must have an absolute basis, and the basis is my holy book. If anything comes along that challenges my holy book, then I don't have an absolute basis for truth. I've been living a lie this whole time. I'm threatened, I'm insulted, and therefore, if science disagrees with my holy book, science is wrong. Scientists are wrong, and it's a threat to that type of believer. I think there are some moderate and liberal Muslims. We know that in Judaism, there's a huge cross-section of non-believers and liberals and conservatives and Orthodox. So,
And seculars.
yeah. So for the kind of Christian I was, and I think for a lot of Muslims as well, if you have built your house on the rock of that holy book, and then it turns out you built your house on the sand, it's very, very uncomfortable to have to rearrange all of that in your thinking. And I think most of us were lazy. We don't want to have to rearrange that. I just want to hold on to my truth. There's an honor there. There's a loyalty there. There's a family togetherness. There's a feeling of certainty that's from this patterns happening in the brain over and over and over again. I think they kind of get burned in the brain if you do them enough. It develops a habit. It's really hard to break.
So they are choice comfortable than facts.
Yeah. Well, they think the holy book is a fact. They think that is the rock, the fact. So the other things there must be something wrong with science and the other things, because I know that my book is the solid fact of reality.
Yeah. Dan, there was a question from the chat room there from Tea Parties for All, and it kind of relates to what was your view on kind of, say, Islam and Judaism? I mean, I know you probably thought they were wrong, but were you hostile towards them, or were you just, oh, they're wrong and that's it?
Well, in the 1970s and 80s, Islam was not on the map very much.
Yeah.
It was one of those faraway things that we never had any direct dealing with. The world was not as united. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have that broadness. So Islam was almost completely ignored in my mind. But of course, Christianity claims that it's based on the Hebrew scriptures. So therefore, Judaism was very precious to Christianity. In fact, my family used to have meetings in our house they didn't call themselves converted Jews, they called themselves completed Jews, Jews who became Christians. And they used to sing even in Hebrew, sing to Jesus. Jews who thought that Jesus was their Messiah. Not all Jews do. I think most Jews do not. But there's a small group of Jews for Jesus who do think it. So we had a very soft spot for Jews because the whole Christian edifice was built on that foundation of the prophecies in the Jewish scriptures and the need for the Passover sacrifice to be killed, and then the need for a Messiah and a Savior. Christianity changed it all, of course, made it a personal Savior, not a national Savior. But so we felt very. I guess I imagined that all Jews were potential Christians, and I never thought that about Muslims, if I thought about Muslims at all.
Well, actually, I would have to say about the thing about some Jews thinking that Jesus was the Messiah. Well, I remember I have a Jewish cousin, and while I was talking to him about how pretty much my doubts of Jesus ever existing, and he even and he agreed. What he mentioned was that the true Messiah is supposed to be a descendant from King David. So it's kind of irrelevant for them to actually believe that Jesus is the Messiah. if he's not the son of if he's not a descendant of King David, if you ask me.
Well, you know, one of the New Testament genealogists does go back to David. But the father would have been irrelevant because Joseph wasn't his real father. But I remember thinking that there's kind of a spiritual lineage as well. And if Joseph was the legal father, then there was still a lineage there because the real father was the Holy Ghost. So, I never thought about that too closely. Or I might have gone and turned my brain into a pretzel. But yeah, you're right. And you're exactly right. If Jesus is the Messiah, how come most Jews don't accept that?
A question I wanted to ask was sort of related to, when was the first time you actually looked at the Bible and kind of saw, like, say, the Old Testament, some of the nasty things? And, like, say, before, were you aware of them, and how did you apologize for them? And then after, when did you first start to think, wow, this is a bit extreme, some of this stuff?
I remember in college, probably maybe 1970, 71, one of my friends who was in my Greek class, his name was Leo. We studied the New Testament and the Old Testament. He opened the Bible to Psalm 137:9, and he said, Dan, look at this. It says, happy shall be he that takes and dashes the little ones against the stones. You should be happy to take little babies and throw them against the rocks. That's what the Bible says. What do you think about that? And that did not bother me one bit. I'm surprised and I'm ashamed that did not bother me. I kind of smugly said to Leo, well, and this is the kind of thing that Christian pastors, they sermonize. They take the Bible to sermonize, not to like find the real truth. I said, well, it's obvious, Leo, that verse is talking about the little ones are the little sins in our lives. And we should be happy to take those little sins that are precious to us and dash them against the stones so that we can live a good Christian life. It wasn't until about 12 years later that I read that same verse and I went, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? How embarrassing. That's talking about genocide. It's talking about killing children and taking innocent babies and throwing them against the rocks. And it doesn't say you should regrettably do this because it's a time of war. It says you should be happy to take these little babies and throw them against the rocks. So it was a gradual change in my mind to where I could read the Bible with new eyes and suddenly be shocked by the very same verses that didn't used to bother me in the past. I think that's part of growing up.
Yeah, because the excuse I've heard for it was the little ones of a certain tribe and that, so that sort of made it okay. It was a very evil tribe, and by dashing their heads, you were stopping these children growing up in such an evil environment, so you were doing them a favour in the long run, but, you're still smashing a baby's head on a rock.
Well, if that's doing them a favor because they go right to heaven, then that's really a pro-abortion argument.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any questions from? There was another question. It was, how long were you with your doubts before you finally stopped preaching? Was it once you doubted you just stopped? Like once you said I'm an atheist, did you just stop overnight, or was there a time where you went through the motions?
Yeah, there was a time. It was 4 months or 5 months.
Yeah.
The summer of 1983, I told myself that I was an atheist. Before that time, my sermons had been changing, obviously. I was getting more liberal. I was not preaching about hell as much. I was preaching more about love. I was becoming more of a liberal preacher. But in the summer of 1983, I told myself, I don't believe this anymore. I'm a brand new baby atheist. But I still had some preaching events on my calendar. I was trying to get out of the ministry gradually, but I was working as a computer programmer, and then I was preaching on the weekends and sometimes once in a while during the midweek. And so I how do you stop a lifetime on a dime? How do you do that? It's kind of like, and one of the Clergy Project ministers said the same thing. He said, it's like if you know that your marriage is over when is the moment? When do you just walk out right then, or do you think and wait and try to do it gracefully? So for me, it took about 4 months until December of that year, December of '83, the middle of December, when I finally said enough is enough, and I decided no more. I can't preach anymore. I turned it all down. I'm kind of ashamed that I was a hypocrite for those 4 months, but it was kind of interesting. I learned something from that period because I knew I did not believe it, but the audience know that, and the audience told me that they were feeling the Spirit of God. I was hating myself. I was in intellectual agony, knowing I shouldn't be up there anymore. It was hypocritical. But a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, "Reverend Barker, I really felt God's Spirit on your ministry." And I was thinking, "You did?" Because, you know, that tells you something. It was like an object lesson in sort of the anthropology of religion, or this, you know, that religion is a big drama that's being acted out by pretense, and so people are going to hear what they want to hear. And so I'm kind of glad I went through that month, but I'm glad I got out of it. And that was the next month in January. Then I sent out my letter to everybody.
And what was the initial reaction from everybody from that letter?
It was everything. It was good and bad.
Yeah.
I got some good responses from.
Hi.
Yep, welcome back. Carry on, Dan.
I got some
I
good
want
responses.
to ask you about your debate
Wait, Jay, let him finish, please.
Yeah, Jay, you let him finish the point.
Muslim guys.
Yeah, Jay, we'll let Dan finish his point.
Go ahead. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
it's okay.
I cannot hear you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, just a second, Jane. I got some good responses from Christian friends that were loving and understanding and friendly, and we're still friends today. But I got some surprisingly ugly responses from family and friends that surprised me, that showed me that we really did not have a true friendship in the first place, because it was a conditional friendship. So, you know, if you take away the condition, what happens to the friendship? If you belong in the same club, the same religion. So that's kind of a painful way to test your friends. But I guess I didn't really lose anything. If they were not real friends in the beginning, I guess I didn't really lose a friend, did I? Because they weren't true friends.
Yeah, it was like Teresa kind of said the same thing last week. Was the most shocking. Well, it's like some of the people she thought that would understand had the worst reaction. Did you find that as well?
Yeah.
Like the ones who would help out sweep the floors at the church and that, they were some of the most vitriolic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's impossible to predict, because people have different personalities and different insecurities. And if your friendship from the beginning is based on true admiration, respect, and love for each other as people, as you really, really like each other, then that can survive. But if it's based on, oh, we're in the same religion or the same club, then that can't survive, because it's based on, you're building your house on the sand, and when the sand moves, the house falls down.
Jay, are you there now?
Jay?
And I think we've lost Jay again.
I cannot hear you clear, guys. So I am so sorry if interrupted
Ask your question.
anyone.
Ask
Because I cannot hear you clear.
Okay.
You have my apologize, okay?
Yeah, ask your question.
Yeah, I want your response about your debate with Muslims.
Yes, I've done 7 debates with Muslims. And one was in Queens, New York. One was in Dearborn, Michigan. I did 2 or 3 in London. And all of the debates, every one of those debates, one in Minnesota, the Muslims were very kind, very friendly, very generous people, very polite. They gave me gifts. We had some good food. We laughed. They're very, very sweet people. And the arguments that my opponents gave were very, very similar to the arguments that Christians give, with, of course, a few differences, because in Christianity, God has a son, but in Islam, God does not have a son. And I think the Muslim apologists are very smart people, and they tend to argue more about the ontological argument. We know there's a God because existence is contingent. You and I are contingent beings, and for there to be contingent beings, there must be a broader context within which these beings have meaning. You know, those kinds of arguments is what the Muslim apologists tend to give. Whereas a lot of times the Christians also rely on things like the resurrection of Jesus, or answers to prayer, or miracles, or prophecy, those kinds of things. So I enjoyed all those debates. And in one of the debates, a lot of the young women were covered from head to toe with the black, what do you call those black?
It's hijab, I think, or
Yeah, they look like Batman, you know. And so,
Is it a burqa?
yeah.
not, you know, hijab, I guess. And you should see the Muslim men, their head turned to stare at those women. But my opponent, his name was Andalusi. He was just dressed normal, like a normal guy. And so I asked him, why do those women have to dress like that? You can dress any way you like. And he said, well, because Allah knows that that men are tempted when they see the flesh of a woman, and men can be tempted, and there's a sexual thing. So Allah is good for us. And I said, well, women have sexual urges too. Those women are looking at your bare arms and your handsome face and your neck. And he got all red. His face got all red, embarrassed. I said, they have sexual drives too, and aren't you tempting them? And he says, well, no, Islam respects women. Islam respects women. And I said, oh, really? Can a woman be caliph? And he said, no, a woman cannot be caliph. I said, why not? Because if a woman is caliph, then she's under the authority of somebody other than Allah. She's under the authority of her husband. So a caliph can never be under someone else's authority. So that shows you right there, there's an inequality. They say women are respected and equal, but in real life, they are not.
Yeah, I say, was it literally like a lot of the arguments were just with God and Jesus swapped for Allah
That
and
big
Muhammad?
lie when you Muslims say it.
Sorry, we're really having difficulty hearing you, Jay. But I was going to say, like, were the arguments literally word for word the same as Christian ones, just with God and Jesus swapped for Allah and Muhammad?
Well, yes.
Yeah, you said Muslims was with you.
Yes, we're really having trouble hearing you, Jay. Yeah, yes, we've lost it again.
Well, they do bring out the same types of things. They bring out cosmology, first cause, the teleological arguments, you know, the design arguments. They bring up those things, which are basically out of the same book that Christian theologians and apologists use. So what else have you got?
Yeah. Mortimer, do you have a question there?
Well, I guess I could ask, on the subject of debates, how do you feel about that? I mean, personally, while I enjoy watching people really kick the crap out of someone who uses those arguments in a debate, I kind of feel like, what's the point? What's there to debate? I mean, I think it's more like if a bit of a douchey way of saying it would probably be, the only one who has something to gain from a debate is the one that has nothing. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I can comment on but what I think are the benefits of debates, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Rarely are you going to change the mind of your opponent. A debate is more of a public event for educational purposes, and especially if it's at a university. Yeah. Most people come to a debate, most people come, you know, for or against, and most people leave for or against, except in a university, there tends to be 10 or 20% of the students who really are in the middle. You're aiming at those people. I have heard people later tell me they have changed their mind after listening to a debate. In fact, I had a guy come up to me. He said he was a conservative Calvinist Christian and he thought I was wrong. But I said a couple of things that got him to thinking, and then he did his own thinking. And he, a couple of years later, came back to me and he said, I'm an atheist now too. So it does happen, not as much as we'd like, but for the educational value of at least presenting an informed case. I had a Christian come up to me afterwards saying, I think you're wrong. I disagree with you. I know God is real. I know atheism is wrong. However, I never imagined that an atheist would be able to say anything coherent. You at least impress me that you know what you're talking about, even though you're wrong. You know?
So because one thing that I came to think about was I watched a debate between William Lane Craig and Lawrence Krauss. And I was kind of surprised at basically all Craig had to do was steer the conversation away from science and go all philosophical. And that because the undecided people in the audience are not scientists. So are they going to listen to the guy who basically says, well, when it all comes down to it, if you want to understand my arguments, you have to become scientists first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had something like that happen last month in Windsor. I debated, is there life after death, with Reverend Joe Boot at the University of Windsor, Canada. And he got up and immediately said, there's no evidence for life after death. He didn't bring in near-death experiences. He didn't bring in the resurrection. He basically said, we know there's life after death because God exists and God says there's life after death. And you atheists have an absurd worldview. And he did exactly what you're saying. He turned it away from the actual debate and turned it into like, how do you know what we know? What is your epistemology? You know, the problem of induction and so on. And so I got up and I complained. I said, this is not right. You're changing the debate. You're admitting you don't have evidence. You're not even tackling the issues. Therefore, we don't have a debate here tonight. By default, I have won this debate because you failed to meet the burden of proof. He didn't buy that, of course, but I think a lot of people in the audience saw that same trick that you're mentioning, trying to deflect from the embarrassing fact that they have nothing to offer.
Yeah, I was just saying we've had a few guests on that have debated William Lane Craig. What was your overall experience of debating him, like your afterthoughts?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question very well.
Oh,
You're
sorry.
asking...
I said we've had a lot of guests on our show who've also debated William Lane Craig. So I was just wondering what your own kind of reflections are on the experiences of debating him.
I've never debated William Lane
Sorry,
Craig.
I thought you had. Sorry, my mistake.
Not formally. We debated on television once.
Okay.
But it was not really, it was not a moderated debate. It was just like a talk show.
Okay.
And he's very polite and very nice, but he keeps saying the same thing over and over. He's got this Kalam argument, and that's kind of all he's got. And I wrote a whole chapter in my book tearing apart the Kalam argument. It's a bad argument. But on television, we run a national TV show together. He basically said, well, I have a personal experience. I personally know God within myself. And the only thing I could say was, well, no, you don't. I used to claim that too, but that's subjective. And if you're right, then everybody's right. That's just a bad argument.
Okay. It was another question, like it's jumping topics again, so I hope you don't mind. When you became an atheist, what kind of pushed you into activism? Like, were you just, at first, did you even think about doing activism?
Well, I don't think I changed at all. I was an activist Christian, and the motivation that drove me into the ministry is the same motivation that drove me out. So I didn't change. I always wanted to stand up and speak the truth, whatever I thought the truth was. So I think what drove me into activism was when I was a kid going to Sunday school. That's what drove me to it, because I wanted to know the truth and speak the truth. And I really value that lesson that my parents gave me, even in church. Don't be ashamed to say what you think is right. So if I could knock on doors for Jesus, I can do the same thing for science and for reason and for kindness. And I remember I sent out my letter in January of '84. And the very first time that I publicly spoke about atheism was in September of '84. What's that, 9 months, 8 months later? On Oprah Winfrey Show. And I had never spoken about these things before, and we have a videotape of that, actually. You can see it online. And I'd never spoken before a hostile audience, and I loved it. And I could see from the video that I just loved being able to say something provocative for a change, to actually say something that made a difference. And most of the audience hated me and Annie Laurie. That's where I met Annie Laurie, on that show. And we later got married. So we have a video of the day we met, which is kind of nice. So I guess I never really changed. I think some of us are just that way. Maybe once a preacher, always a preacher. And you spend a lifetime developing these skills, and you want to use those skills. So I guess I'm just doing what I've always done my whole life.
Okay, and so what led you into the Freedom from Religion Foundation? Well, like, what's the story?
I read a book by Annie Laurie.
Yep.
Annie Laurie Gaylor wrote a book about women in the Bible. And so I sent her a letter in early 1984 saying, I really like your book. I never thought about that. And she did not answer me. But her mother answered me. And she said, could you write us a story? Your story sounds interesting. So I wrote an article about my story. And then they had me come on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And then I gave a speech at the convention in Milwaukee. And ever since then, I've just been volunteering and working with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Started full-time in 1987. And then 2004, we became co-presidents.
Okay. So can you just tell us, like, what happens day to day in the Freedom from Religion Foundation?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun here. We're going to expand our building this year because we're so crowded. We have about 13 full-time staff, and other people come in. We have 4 full-time attorneys, and none of them has a proper office right now. It's an old 2-story building that used to be spacious, but now it's really crowded. So we take phone calls and requests from people all over the country complaining about state-church separation. Last year, we had almost 2,500 complaints in the year. We sent out more than 1,000 letters. We've had about 150 clear victories just from letters. We also go to court. And right now we have 13, maybe 14, I forget. I think we're filing another lawsuit this week.
Yeah.
Lawsuits in the courts on federal court, state court, on separation of state and church. We publish a newspaper, we publish books, we produce music, we do radio shows, we travel, we do debates, we put up billboards, we have chapters around the country, we try to keep religion and government separate, and we try to educate the public about the views of non-believers. So every day is different, every day is fun. This show is being done on a Sunday, on Easter Sunday, and here we are in the office working. Annie Laurie's downstairs, probably sending out another letter of complaint. So we need more space. We're going to quadruple our space in a year from now.
So how do you respond to the common complaints that people have about, well, the organization? It's just kind of, you know, grumpy atheists that can't let anything go. Why do you have to sue all the time? I mean, what's your general response to people like that?
Well, we're known as the friendly atheists, I think, the friendly neighborhood atheists, because we have a lot of fun. And it's the believers who complain. You know, they say, why do you have a problem with In God We Trust on the money? It's no big deal. And we say, well, if it's no big deal, then you shouldn't miss it if it were removed. It's obviously a big deal to you. And I think it's because a lot of believers cannot distinguish between neutrality and hostility. They think that if you move to make something neutral, that that's a hostile act against them because they want to be able to stamp their mark all over the government. So we get that all the time. We get complaints, we get death threats, we get other kinds of threats, the things they want to do to our female employees. The police come in here. The police were in here last week dealing with the death threat that we got because some religious people are very, very insensitive and intolerant. When you try to respect the First Amendment that guarantees that the government should be neutral on religion. So we take it as I guess it's a sign of success. When we get those complaints, that means we're doing something right.
Okay, and I think we have Jay back. Are you there, Jay?
Yeah, you said like about tolerance. You said Muslim was so polite and kind with me. Believe me, sir, if you disagree with them in reality, they will kill you without any doubt. So this is kindness will disappear.
Well, I think you're right, Jane. With the fundamentalist Muslims, you're absolutely correct. The same thing is true with some Christians. But not all Muslims are fundamentalists. I have disagreed with Muslims. I have told them they are wrong. And they have smiled at me and nodded and said, you make an interesting point. I'll have to think about that. So they're not all the same. The ones we have to worry about are the extremists, the fundamentalists, who are taking things so literally. But that happens in all religions. I know in my country, even though there's a lot of bad Muslims, most of them are good people. Most of them are just human beings with their families and their jobs, and you know, they're human beings like everybody else. It's only the fundamentalists that are the extreme, and a lot of Muslims don't really read the Quran that much anyway. So, so you are right, but I am right too.
Yeah, you are right. In this point, not all Muslim is extreme, but the extreme effect on the public, it's more than Christian extremely effect on the public. This is the point. This is the difference. The ordinary Muslims get huge effect and influence from extreme more than the ordinary Christians or other religions get from their extreme. Our extreme led to kill. Your extreme led to threats. This is huge difference.
Yes, I think you're right, but 600 years ago, Christianity was exactly the same. They were killing, they were murdering, they were burning at the stake. But Islam is a newer religion, and I think Christianity is growing up a little bit faster. But it's the same. The Bible is just as bad as the Quran. The Bible has all of that same stuff in it. But I think Christianity, especially in Europe, has finally matured past that point, and Islam is still in kindergarten, I think, and they still need a lot of growing. So you're right. In general, I think there's more of a threat from the average Muslim in the world than from the average Christian. But that doesn't mean they're all bad. It doesn't mean there's no hope. I think Islam can also improve, maybe not in my lifetime, but I think it can improve.
The cost will be high.
Yeah. Well, the 30 Years' War, look at Europe.
Yeah.
Look how many millions of people were killed, Protestants and Catholics killing each other. It was a very high price to pay, but Europe survived.
We're going to hand over to Casey now for some questions because I think you're only with us for a few more minutes. So, Casey, you did have some questions ready.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on like how to take care of like, you know, the in God we trust motto, knowing that it was not the original motto, it was just it was just adopted to separate the Soviet Union from the U.S.
Yeah, well, originally, the motto appeared in the Civil War on a coin, and it was a minister who petitioned the Secretary of the Treasury, Salmon Chase, and said, "We need to put God on our money because we are a Christian nation." He thought. So there was "In God We Trust" was put on a 2-cent piece, and it appeared on a number of coins Not all of them, but on a number of coins. It appeared ever since then. And then in the 1950s, you are correct that that phrase became our national motto. And then it was put on all currency, all dollars. If you can find a dollar bill before 1957, it does not have "In God We Trust" on it. Any currency before that time is what we call clean money. And you're
What
right.
should we call? Go on.
Their motive was to fight godless communism and to send a message to the rest of the world that we, United States, is a godly Christian nation. So they had, every time that was introduced, there was a clear religious motive. And our secular government is not supposed to have a religious motive. That's what's wrong with the phrase. It's there with the intention of promoting religion.
Yes, maybe we should just go have another motto, like the Justice League. In good we trust.
Yeah. Huh.
But anyways, I also have this other question, like, would you describe today's missionaries sometime kind of like vacationaries, basically, in the sense
No.
that they will... Wait, what?
I don't think so. I think most of them work hard. I don't know. Maybe you know something I don't. It can be a rough
I was
life.
just reading about it on about.com one time. How, like, some missionaries, they'll... go on.
Well, I think you might be right to some degree, because I remember we used to go down into Mexico every summer. And for a lot of the students that came with us, it was sort of a cultural vacation. We preached and we sang and we did our ministry, but it was, what we really brought back from it was the experience of traveling to a foreign country and learning something and seeing something new. So I guess you're kind of right. There is that aspect of getting away, and but they don't make much money, as far as I know. Most of them, we didn't make any money. We had to pay money to go. So,
especially in Mexico, but and then for another question, well, I remember hearing this one time, hearing that from a previous show, the same show that I asked my first question from. Would you say that, is it true that basically, did Christianity start U.S. politics? I mean, I'm rather skeptical about that. U.S. politics even before the U.S. Though I'm rather skeptical of it, since with the Treaty of Tripoli and all. But what's your take?
if you mean by politics, fighting for political power, then there were a lot of Christians involved in that, of course. And some of our founders were devoted Christians, but none of them voted to put God in our Constitution. None of them voted to pray at the Constitutional Convention. Benjamin Franklin proposed prayer, but it was not even seconded. They didn't even vote. They didn't have it. They had models of previous charters and constitutions that did have God in them, and they deliberately took it out. So, and you're right about the Treaty with Tripoli, that our first Congress voted, and President Adams signed it, that the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. So, it is true that a lot of the founders had religious motives, and some of them, their faith was very important to them. So you can't discount that. But what really counts is their official acts. Those very acts that they did, those official documents, were secular and totally godless and not Christian at all.
That's exactly what I thought. Now, for my last question before I go, well, would you say that, remember when, during the Democratic National Convention, they basically put God in like the party platform, and despite many protesting against it, protesting like they will not have it on because they, based off a popular vote. Well, would you say that, does it feel alien? Would you say it felt alienating when they did that?
Yes, it did, but we all understood it was political. We all knew it. The
Yeah.
Republicans had God, and so it was like a gotcha issue. Aha! And any people in the middle who might be influenced by religion, who was going to pick between the two parties, well, the Democrats, wrongly, I think, but they still thought, well, we better put God in our platform too. So, you know, during an election time, everybody's very pious. Everybody wants to show how good they are so they can get that vote. But after the election, you probably read that it was surprising that the non-religious and young people had a very powerful influence and probably contributed toward that election, toward moving that election. And young people are at least 30% non-religious, and the non-religious were at least 70% Democratic. So, and by the way, our group is not political. We have Republicans in our group, and socialists and libertarians and so on, and Democrats. But at least the numbers show that for the first time ever, the non-religious were noticed as part of the voting. So maybe in the future, the parties won't be so eager or won't feel the need to kowtow to the religious right as much as they have ever since Ronald Reagan, I guess.
I see. Well, I will say it was nice being able to see the guy who I've been wanting to see since my 10th grade year. And well, now, if you want to know how long that is, well, I'm in college now, so
Oh, okay.
it was really an honor to talk to you.
Well, you too, Casey.
Right, good night, Casey. We'll speak to you later.
See ya.
See ya.
Okay, there was a question from Autumn Sky in Belfast, and I'll read it out. They've gone through your Easter challenge and was wondering how you respond normally when people can't seem to come to terms with the contradictions in their own texts, and how do you view that cognitive dissidence?
Yeah, well, it's 2 or 3 different things. I used to think that the apparent contradictions had explanations, even if I didn't understand them, that the PhDs and the biblical seminaries and the theologians, they had answers for what I couldn't figure out. And so there really was not a contradiction. And you often hear about, 4 different people looking at an elephant will give you a different description, right?
Yeah.
And so you often also hear people saying, well, if all of the gospel writers agreed with each other, then we could accuse them of collusion. But the fact that they disagree means that they were human beings looking at it from a different angle, which actually makes it stronger. That, you know, you hear that argument a lot. It makes it a stronger case.
Yeah.
Of course, if they all agreed, the Christians wouldn't say that it was collusion. They would say, look at how great God is to inspire them all. So, and then another thing is that a lot of them actually think they have explained the contradictions. Some of them have come to me and said, look, if you take the Greek word here, and if you take this timing here, then it says that the women got to the tomb before the stone was rolled away, but that past tense really should be the past perfect tense. The women got to the tomb and the stone had been rolled away. They tried to reinterpret, you know. And those are easy to deal with. You just look at the text and see what the author actually meant and said. But when it comes to actual contradictions that they cannot disagree with, for example, did Solomon have 4,000 stalls or 40,000? Some of them will say, well, that was a scribal mistake. One of the copyists made a mistake when they copied the Bible. So the original didn't have a contradiction, but some of the copies do. They'll say that too.
Okay, Jay, do you have a question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I liked when Annie she said in her interview with Fox. She said the one from Fox asked her, "Why
We're losing you. We're losing you again, Jay.
you with
Yeah, you've cut up really
put
bad.
that ad about the reasons and Virginia got it there?"
So, Jay, you were cutting up very badly again. We didn't get all of that.
So Anna responds to her, I meant to say something true.
Sorry, Jay, we're not getting you very clear at all. We can't make you out. I said, if you just write the question down for us in the chat room, then we can ask it to Dan. I said, it's not working today. Okay. I said, Mortimer, did you have a question there?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something.
Well, there was another question. It's going back to the Freedom from Religion Foundation. What's the most volatile case you've taken on where you got the most kind of trouble or flack for?
Well, we get the most flack when we complain about sports and religion. You know, you can criticize God and you can criticize sports, but you put the two together, it's like magnified. So when we complain about prayers over the loudspeakers at football games at public high schools in the South, we get an awful lot of angry calls. When we complain about the National Day of Prayer, we sued the president. We actually got a lot of support, a lot of members from that. So sports and religion is a big one that we expect our phone to be ringing for a long time when that happens.
Yeah. And I think that's Jay's question.
I meant to say something true. Do you think the truth makes them fear?
So I kind of feel like we're missing the first half of that question, Jay. So if you can type out the whole thing for us, that'll be a big help. So can you give us a little background on the Clergy Project?
Yes,
Jay, the audio is terrible for you. We literally can't make out a word you're saying. Dan, I was going to ask, can you
move me from. Can you move me, please? Because
I'm sorry, Jay. We do have to cut you off because the audio is so bad. Dan, I was wanting to can you give us a little background on the Clergy Project, how that got started up?
Yes, it was 3 different things that came together. One of them was the fact that for many years I've been collecting stories like mine of clergy who have left the faith. And I have been hearing from clergy all over the country who either are out of the ministry or they're still preaching. And so I've been collecting those stories, wanting to make a book of it. And there's a whole bunch of us former clergy that know each other. And then the second thing was Daniel Dennett, the philosopher, and his colleague, Linda Lascola, worked on a study of preachers who are not believers that came out in 2010. And when they were doing that study, they asked me if I knew any people, and I was able to give them a few names, and they used a couple of them for their study, actually. And the third thing was Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, over the years, has talked about the difficulty of ministers and priests who are trapped, who no longer believe. And he and I met in Copenhagen just briefly for dinner and talked about what to do about these preachers. And he said, well, why don't we start a group or something, or a scholarship maybe to help the preachers? And I said, maybe we could call it Save a Preacher. So those 3 threads came together. And in January of 2011, Elizabeth with the Richard Dawkins Foundation, Linda Lascola, who worked with Daniel Dennett, and I, the 3 of us met at the American Indian Museum in Washington, D.C., and we said, let's start a group. The Richard Dawkins Foundation put up the money, a lot of money, to create this secret online forum. And then Linda and Dan Dennett were able to contact and bring names in from their study. I was able to bring in a bunch of names from my study, from my contacts. We collected about 50 names, actually. And in March of 2011, this forum went online with about 50 the founding 50, we call it. Today, there's about 420, 2 years later. So, and it's always been about 1/4 of the group that are active clergy. They're still in the ministry and they want to get out. So today, there's more than 100 of those people that are still in the pulpit or in the ministry. Preachers, priests, rabbis, there's one former imam, and we have a couple of preachers' wives, too, who are in the group. So it's a landing place. It's a place where they feel safe. We talk about our experiences. We compare notes. What did you read? How did your family react? What job did you get? How did you get out of the ministry? You know, it's like a support group. But we also have funds, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation has collected money to help with some of these. And then the Todd Stiefel Foundation gave a large donation specifically to help with the employment transition. So there's a company that we're working with that is able to help. You know, they're doing it for a cheaper cost, but then we're able to pay the clergy to get into this program of finding another line of work. It's brand new. Right now, there's only been one recipient of that grant, and there's a second one. There's some others that are applying for it. So it's a new group still, but it's pretty exciting to be in touch with. We go on the secret forum, and there's 400 of us that we can compare notes from conservative, fundamentalists, moderates, liberals, all sorts of clergy that must be a sign that there's something happening among the clergy in the world, actually.
Yeah, Mortimer, you had a question there?
Yeah, your earlier question reminded me of something that I wanted to ask. You brought up some examples of cases that gave you a lot of flack. The sports thing, for example. But so I wanted to ask about the types of cases that you get, and well, I guess that's an example. But also, what's the success rate?
We have a good success rate, and even some of the cases that we lost were lost not on the merits but on standing. We lost the Hine decision where we were challenging George Bush on the faith-based initiative. The Supreme Court did not say we were wrong. The Supreme Court did not say Bush was right. The Supreme Court just shut the door and said, you can't even sue. You don't have the standing to sue. So that was a technical loss, but it wasn't a loss on the merits. The same thing happened with the National Day of Prayer. We've got a wonderful victory out of the court that the National Day of Prayer is wrong. The judge ruled with strong reasoning. The appeals court overturned it, not on the merits, but on standing, saying we didn't show injury, so we can't even take the case. So they just ignored the decision of the court. So it's hard to count those as losses, but they are losses because we couldn't proceed with the case. But in general, we have a pretty good success rate. At least half of the cases we take, we have clear wins in. Good Friday case in Wisconsin, and we had the very first adjudicated faith-based initiative lawsuit in Milwaukee, where we won that case. And after we won it, the religious organization had to shut down because they couldn't survive without public money. We won the one in Arizona called Mentor Kids, connected loosely with Chuck Colson. We do lose some cases because of the judge. Not because we did a bad job, but you never can tell what a judge is going to say. And even the cases we lose, we should have won. And we take them from the symbolic to the money cases. We think they're all important.
Did I hear right that you're challenging the money again at the moment?
Yes.
Okay.
We are.
So, just out of, because I'm not up to date, how many times has the money been challenged? Exactly.
Well, it has been attempted 3 times before.
Yeah.
And we were one of the 3. We tried it in the 1990s. Back in the 1970s, a man tried it in California in that circuit. And then Madeleine Murray O'Hair tried it in the 80s, I think. We tried it in the 90s. And in all 3 of those attempts, it never got to court. The judge simply said, you cannot sue. There's because in God we trust is not a religious phrase. So In God We Trust has never withstood a constitutional challenge. It's never actually lost or won. It's never actually been in court yet. So we're trying a fourth time in a different federal circuit. This time Michael Newdow wrote the complaint for us to show really strong standing and to show the true history of it. He really ratcheted up all the issues to a totally new level, proving beyond any doubt that there was a religious motive in every single move to put In God We Trust on the money. So it's a possibility that the judge is going to say, well, we still don't have to get into court. So it would be a mistake to count those previous 3 losses as real losses, because they weren't really losses on the merits. They were simply the court slamming the door on your ability to sue. We think Newdow's complaint is much, much, much stronger now. In fact, Newdow used one of the national surveys that we conducted in our previous attempt to show that indeed 2/3 of Americans do consider In God We Trust to be a religious phrase, and they get all upset. We can hardly complain about anything on state church matters without somebody pulling a dollar out of their wallet saying, look, why can't we pray at city council? We have God on our money. So they're using it as a religious justification for religious violations, and yet the judges are saying, no, it's not religious, which is I think it's just a way of them, it's like a hot potato. They don't want to handle it, so they're finding some way to slam the door without it getting into court. If it got into court, the arguments are so persuasive that how could it withstand constitutional scrutiny? It just can't. It has no has no secular purpose. It has no business being on our money, and it has to go. But we're dealing with human beings on courts, so I guess we have to wait and see what this attempt will yield.
Okay, and is there any other kind of big cases that you've got, like any kind of prayer in school or evolution cases?
We've never taken an evolution case, but we have some big cases. We're suing the IRS, the U.S. government, to enforce the electioneering standards. These pastors and religious groups that are lobbying and endorsing from the pulpit, they should be losing their tax exemption. We're suing over that. Another lawsuit we have is over a little known fact that in the United States, every clergy, preacher, minister, priest, rabbi, every clergy gets to exclude their housing as income for taxation purposes, which is a huge break. Imagine if you could just subtract all your rent every year as income. So I never even made that money. It would lower your tax basis. So we think that's unfair. I used to take that break when I was a preacher, and now that I'm working for Freedom from Religion, I don't get to take that advantage. It's an unfair advantage that our government is giving to religion. So if we win that case, you can bet there's going to be a huge scream, because now churches are going to have to pay their preachers more. So that's another big one. We're suing over a big Jesus statue in a federal park at a ski slope in Montana. We're suing over 2 different high schools with 10 Commandments monuments on the high school property by the front door. Things like that, from small to big cases.
Mortimer, did you have a question there?
No, I'm trying to figure out what it is Jay wanted to ask. Maybe we should take that.
There is a chat room question just come in, and it's Dan. Do you agree that the indoctrination of children is child abuse, given that religious groups all have preconceptions and prejudices?
Yeah, it is a form of child abuse not to allow the natural, curious, intellectual mind of a child to seek and to learn and to grow. Indoctrination is one way of stifling that natural human curiosity. And in some cases, the child abuse is material. Sometimes it's physical. Sometimes there are children who die because their parents do not take them to the doctor because they think that they pray instead. There have been some tragic cases. So,
and there are also people who refuse certain types of treatment, like blood transfusions and things like that.
Yes, that's true. So I don't think child abuse is a monolithic phrase. I think there are degrees. So there can be emotional child abuse. Is bullying abusive if you're not touching the person? Of course it is. So when you're indoctrinating children with this dangerous worldview, especially the fear of hell, you're telling children you are basically a bad little boy. You are an evil little girl, and you deserve to be tortured forever by demons and devils unless you accept Jesus. Well, think what that does to your self-image. That can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a child grows up thinking, I'm bad, I'm evil, all my natural thoughts are horrible, well, then that can amplify in the life of a child. And how much better to just let the child be a natural, accept human nature for what it is. It's not evil. It's not necessarily good either. It just is what it is. I think there'd be less psychological problems and less problems with fundamentalists' extreme religious belief in our country.
Do you have a follow-up there? Because there's questions coming in the chat room, Mortimer.
No, go ahead with those.
Okay, there's two questions. Cosmic Dust asks, would you ever think of running for office, Dan?
No, never. I don't have that kind of ambition. I love what I'm doing, and to run for office, I think I would have to make too many compromises in my own principles, in my own ambitions are not in politics. So,
yeah. Okay, and there's another question from Tea Parties for All. Do you ever think the Republican Party will become secular again?
I don't know. I lost the gift of prophecy many years ago. But, you know, there's a lot of atheists in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
I think there's more atheists in the Republican Party than belong to our group. You know, it's a huge group. So, and we have Republicans in our group. And I think there's a lot of Republicans who are fiscal conservatives, but maybe on social issues, they're not so conservative. They're more like libertarians. So maybe there's some hope there. Look what happened with, who would have predicted the Soviet Union? Mm-hmm. Look what happened with Europe. You know, Europe has a huge history of religious ferocity, and yet today most Europeans are totally secular. So I suppose the same thing could happen with the Republican Party.
Yeah. There was, I've lost the question I was going to ask. Oh, it's gone. Martin,
somebody gonna ask about the song that I wrote with Charles Strauss. Do you know about that?
No, I don't.
No, I don't know about that either.
Charles Strauss is the famous Broadway composer who wrote Annie. You know the musical Annie. The sun will come up tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar. He wrote Bye Bye Birdie. You know, Put on a Happy Face. Just a you know, dozens of well-known songs. He's in his 80s now. And we honored him at our convention in Connecticut a year and a half ago. And he turned to me at dinner and he said, hey, Dan, send me some words and I'll set them to music. And I thought, whoa, okay. It took me about 6 months and I finally sent him some words and he set them to music. So he and I have a brand new atheist song that we wrote. It just came out. It's called... It just came out on our new album called Adrift on a Star, and it's really exciting to work with somebody like that, and to have him be so open about his lifelong atheism and so proud about it. So, if you want to hear that song called "Poor Little Me," I'm going to brag a little bit. It's a Charles Strauss, Dan Barker song. You can find it on our album Adrift on a Star.
Okay. Finally, I remember my question was, is there many religious people that support Freedom from Religion Foundation?
Yes.
Is it quite a significant number or is it a minority?
It's a minority. Yeah. Most of our members are atheists and agnostics, but we have some liberal Jews and some Wiccans and some Unitarians, and we have a few Christians even who like what we do. It's not so much on the membership, but it's like when we take a lawsuit. For example, we sued the city of Green Bay, Wisconsin. That's where the Green Bay Packers come from, because they had a big nativity scene at City Hall. And we won that lawsuit, by the way. But a lot of religious people joined us in the lawsuit. Catholic, Protestant, Jews, Wiccans. A lot of them understand the importance of keeping religion and government separate. And that helps our case.
All right.
Because it doesn't look like it's just a bunch of angry atheists going after the birth of Jesus. But it's also Christians and Jews and Protestants and others joining us. So we do have a lot of support when it comes to that part of our goal.
Okay. And Mortimer, do you have a question there?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Jay's question here. I think I understand that quality is more important than the number. I guess the number of atheists or something like that. Do you think that we as atheists can make a difference in the world? I think that's what she's asking.
Yeah. Well, we are making a difference. So
yeah,
there's proof there. And I guess she was probably saying that truth is not determined by vote, except for like social truth, like a verdict of a jury. A verdict isn't really truth. A verdict is the very word means the truth that is said to be true legally.
Yeah.
But in general, truth in science is not determined by a vote. It's determined by observation, by experiment. So it doesn't matter if there were only 5 atheists in the whole country. We have the same place at the same table to make our arguments as anyone else.
Okay. There was another question that's just come in, and he's asking, it's back to the debates, but he's asking specifically the debates he did in the aftermath of 9/11. I think there was some debates he did 2 years after 9/11 with Muslims. And yeah, I don't know, he hasn't really formed that into a question, but I suppose I'll try. What was the atmosphere at those debates like? Where were they held and that? Can you give us just a background to them?
Yeah, the first debate I did with a Muslim was in 2001 or 2. It was right after, I think it was 2002, in Queens, outside of New York City, at the huge Islamic Center, huge. And that was one of the nicest, best events I've ever had. I think because Muslims were trying really, really hard to show the world that they're good, kind, rational people, that they're not all evil terrorists. And so, of course, atheists have to do the same thing. So I think the debate was like, which one of us has the shorter horns? You know what I mean? We're trying to show everybody, hey, we're all nice, reasonable. And so the debate I did there with Hassanain Rajabali was an intense debate, and we disagreed, but it was so nicey. You know what I mean? It was just so, I guess for PR purposes, the Muslims who do debates, those kind of Muslims really do want to put on a good face. So well, I did another one a few years later in Dearborn, Michigan, and it was a little strange because all the women had to sit on one side and the men on the other, but that's their culture, and I'm thinking, well, okay, but there was a woman, an atheist woman, who showed up to the event, and in fact, she had been a man before. She's very tall. She has a strong handshake. Her name is Tracy. Very sweet, and she likes to dress quite colorful and maybe a little bit flamboyant. I mean, very wonderful woman. And I saw her walk into the event trying to decide what side of the room to sit on, you know, because the women were all over with they looked kind of solemn, you know, and the men could dress any way they wanted to. And here's this former male who's now a wonderful female trying to decide. She eventually sat with the men, as did a number of the women freethinkers as well. They didn't want to be sitting over like with these quiet Muslim women. But I enjoyed them. I enjoyed all those. And I did the debate I did in Minnesota with it was fun. I started off saying, you Muslims say there is no God but Allah. And I have to admit that I agree the first 2/3 of that sentence.
It's quite strange,
Yeah.
that sentence, because I've actually had some Muslim apologists try and use it with me. He says, well, you're halfway to being a Muslim because we say there is no God as well. And then they'll say, but after that we say, but Allah. So they're trying to say, oh, but so you're okay with me? You're almost a Muslim.
Huh.
So have you come across that one?
No, but you could say, well, then you're almost an atheist.
But I think it's a guy, yeah, that's the name. It's come up in the chat room. It's Zakir Nayak, or so. He's a well-known Muslim apologist. That's one of his opening lines. But
Yeah.
there's a whole load of questions coming in now.
Yeah, while we're on this topic, I'd like to.
Yeah, carry on, Mark.
Belzer mentioned Krauss and his reaction to the separation of men and women at that debate not too long ago. I believe he walked out.
Unless unless they got rid of the segregation.
Yeah. Dan, do you think he handled that well, or should we respect things like that?
Well, in that sense, I would not walk out. I did walk out of a debate. I refused to do a debate where no women were allowed. It was a Catholic debate in Minnesota put on by a men's organization. I accepted the debate not realizing that it was put on by a men's group and it was for men only. And after it had been publicized and everything, I said, wait a minute. I'm sending out invitations to people. I'm going to tell my atheist women friends they can't come to this event, but their male partner can. Does Annie Laurie have to sit out in the car? And I asked them, could you please make an exception for this one event? It's the topic had to do with the historicity of Jesus. So what does that have to do with, if the debate was something about how to be a better husband, maybe you could see that there might be some reason for have men only. But they wouldn't budge. It was such a high principle to them that it was a men's group for men only and no women were allowed. And I said, well, then count me out. I can't be a part of that. But with the Muslims, I asked, when we were having dinner in Queens, I asked Hassanine, I said, how come all the women are sitting over at that table and all the men are over here? And he said, well, that's our culture. And I said, well, could I go over and sit with them? And he said, sure, you could. They wouldn't throw you out if you wanted to. But it would be kind of like a man walking into a woman's restroom. There's a certain feeling, he said, among women. I mean, would you want to walk into a women's restroom, even though it might not be against the law? You'd want to respect their feeling. And so I kind of halfway understood the point, although we were discussing philosophy and theology and politics, and the women were just over there talking about food. So, I mean, it was a total cultural, the men are the real human beings. But also at that debate, any man was welcome to sit with the women. And any of those women was welcome to sit with the men. So it was more of a cultural, voluntary thing rather than a hard and fast rule. So I didn't feel that uncomfortable there.
Okay.
I'll go to the chat room questions. There's quite a few come in. Astro Sweat asks, would you agree that one of the biggest organized religions has kept historical evidence secret in the Vatican?
Yeah, we don't know what the secrets are, but yes.
Definitely, okay. Next, I think it's just a general, what your view is on euthanasia.
Well, I think if you can't control your death, then you can't control your life, because that is your life. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a personal matter. I support death with dignity. There was a member of our group who had advanced Parkinson's. His name was Reed Schuster. And it got worse and worse. He couldn't feed himself anymore. He couldn't even go to the bathroom. His family, you know what I mean? It just got worse and worse. And he was dying. And all the doctors agreed he was dying. He was in Texas. And one day he dragged himself out to the garage and he shot himself. Killed himself. And his daughter had to come home and discover him out in the garage, had to find that. And the whole family said they understood why he did that. He completely lost all dignity. He was dying. But they wished they could have had a farewell. They could have held hands with him. They wished they could have had a dignified, human way of handling that situation rather than the police had to come. They had to do an investigation, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So for those people who truly want it, who are truly dying, there's no out. I think the laws ought to allow for us to control the way we exit our lives as well.
And another question is someone about Unitarian Universalism. Have you ever attended a congregation?
Yeah, a lot.
All right.
I speak at their groups a lot. Yeah.
I say I'm not familiar with that term, so what is Unitarian Universalism?
Well, in the United States, it is a religion with no creed. It doesn't tell you what you must believe. Originally, Unitarians were like Servetus, that there's no Trinity. God is only one. Kind of like Muslim. Islamic theology is Unitarian. There's only one God. God is one. And Universalist was a small group of religious who said there's no hell, everybody's going to heaven. It's a universal salvation. So they were both very liberal groups, and they came together, Unitarian Universalists, and formed, was it 1950s, I think, or 60s? They formed the Unitarian Universalists, which is in the United States, and I think in England, in many other countries, it's more of an ethical gathering. Some of them are believers and some of them are not. Every single Unitarian Universalist congregation I've been to has had a strong subset of atheists and agnostics, but they've also had some liberal Christians and liberal Jews, and they all get along, and they're mostly concerned with the real world, with solving real problems. They're very social organized, social justice. They're involved with helping the needy and that. And so I admire the UU groups because of their emphasis on this world, on really solving real problems. And many members of the Freedom from Religion Foundation are Unitarian Universalists. They're similar to another group called Ethical Culture. Ethical Culture is a religion on paper, at least. It's a religion according to the IRS, but there's no supernatural. It's just an ethical group of people that meet every Sunday to talk about real morality, not supernatural things.
Okay.
My question for you,
Yes, Jay.
this, what is come first?
Sorry, Jay. It's not working again. You'll have to.
Human rights
Jay.
or respect culture when I use human rights?
Oh, I got the question.
All right, cool. Sorry.
Yeah, Ayaan Hirsi Ali talks about that a lot. Because suppose an immigrant group comes to your country and they bring in their cultural differences. On the one hand, we like to respect them. Diversity, freedom of association, freedom of religion. We want to respect that. However, some of those groups bring with them a denial of human rights along with it, especially regarding women. They shut up the women. The women can't go to college. The women can't control their own paycheck, or they can't even work, or they're allowed to be beaten, spousal rape and so on. So in a Western culture, if one of these immigrant implant religions brings with it things that violate human rights, how far do we go with respecting the diversity, and where do we draw the line? And I think people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali are saying that any group that wants to come and to live and enjoy the benefits of a Western society, which includes democracy and equality and human rights and so on, should conform to at least a minimal amount of human rights. They should not be allowed to beat their women, and we should not look the other way. We should tell them, we respect you and we respect your religion, but we do not respect those actions that are harming other human beings. We have to draw the line somewhere, and I think we draw it at harm, if there's any real harm that's being done, and any human rights that are being not respected, we need to say, that's bad, that's wrong, stop that. You can have your religion, but you're crossing the line of human rights.
Thank you, sir.
No problem at all. There was, well, this is a question someone asked Teresa last week. Do you look upon your years as a pastor with regret? Like maybe you felt you wasted those years, or do you look back on it in a more pragmatic way?
Yeah, well, I think all of us can look back at our lives with some regret. Every one of us. You know, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. So on the one hand, yes, because I was very smart, very helpful. I could have gone into science. I could have gone into, I don't know, I could have been an astronaut. I don't know what I could have done something really very useful with those 19 years instead of waiting for Jesus to come and preaching the gospel, you know. Yeah. So I regret that. On the other hand, I probably would have done the same thing all over again in the same situation. So I'm taking those years now and turning them to good advantage. Teresa and Jerry DeWitt and myself and a bunch of other former clergy, we have a certain earned status because of our reputation as clergy members that's kind of special, if you know what I mean. We can say to the believers, hey, I've been there, I've done that, I was ordained, I preached. So that doesn't win the argument, but it gets you halfway there, you know what I mean? It's like they can't say we have not tried it. Nobody could accuse me of ignoring Christianity because I lived it for 19 years. So in that sense, no, I don't regret it. Now, as an atheist activist, I'm glad I have those years under my belt so that I can say, I did my best, but I put it to the test and it fails the test.
Just to follow up, do you still get people saying to you, you weren't really a true Christian if you lost your faith? Do you still get that? And what's your usual response to them?
Yeah, I get that a lot. My response is, if I was not a true Christian, then nobody is. Who are you to say what a true Christian is? Even the Bible says, you shall know them by their fruits. Not by what they say, but by their fruits. And my life exhibited all the fruits of the Spirit, according to the Bible. So I believed it, I prayed, I got goosebumps, I preached, I sacrificed, I traveled, I ministered. People were born again and saved. There are people in the ministry today, partly because of my ministry. So the fruits speak for themselves. And who are those Christians to judge? Who are they to say who is or who isn't a Christian? And they may as well not be true Christians either.
Was that Marty or Jay coming in there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
my
sort
question.
of wondering.
Go ahead,
oh,
Mark.
Martin first.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm surprised no one's asked this yet, or maybe someone had and I just missed it. But what was like if there was like a first spark, as it were, that got you started doubting? You gave this talk that mentioning Adam and Eve, but I mean, is there a moment that you would identify as like, when I heard that, that's when I started doubting, or was it just gradual, and how did that work in that case?
Yeah, for me it was gradual, and there were a number of little things, but remember, I wasn't going from fundamentalist Christian straight to atheism. It was most of it was within Christianity. So Christians doubt a lot of things, particular little things within their faith, and some of them migrate within Christianity. They stay Christians, but they turn into a different kind of Christian. They become more liberal or more tolerant, or maybe they go the other way sometimes. But so the thing about Adam and Eve was at the beginning, Adam and Eve didn't lead me to atheism. What Adam and Eve did it kind of loosened my brain a little bit to be more liberal in my thinking. And that was part of the process of growing and moving. And there were other things as well along the way that I remember reading a science magazine. Do you remember Omni magazine? It used to be a science magazine called Omni.
Yeah.
And the science fiction writer Ben Bova had a one-page article in there about creationism and evolution. I was a Christian when I was reading this article by this scientist, and what he said hit me right between the eyes. It was like, whoa, I never thought of that. What he said was very simple. He said, all these Christians talk about wanting equal time for creationism in the science class. Well, do they really want equal time? Would they like a chapter from Charles Darwin inserted between Genesis 1 and 2? Would they invite a scientist into their pulpit on Sunday morning to give equal time to another point of view? Do they really want equal time, or do they really want their own dogma? And it was almost like looking at myself from outside of myself. It was almost like being chastised by, oh, of course. I've been saying we want equal time, but I guess that's really not, that's really a false argument. I remember that moment. It didn't turn me into an atheist, but I remember feeling a little embarrassed, a little ashamed at what I had been saying before, and I modified my opinions a little bit. So there were dozens of little things like that happened until I went all the way across.
Yeah, I realized that there's almost never, I guess, a specific moment where you go from fundamentalist to atheist. I was more interested in like a moment where you start to doubt, like the first little doubtlet appears in your mind. But I think you've answered that question, so thank you.
Well, I will say something that I don't think I've ever said in speeches.
Okay.
About the same time that I was beginning to migrate, I took an IQ test just for fun. There was some IQ test, the Langdon IQ test. And I thought, I like tests. I really love taking tests. So I took this IQ test and I sent it off. And a few weeks later, the guy responded and he said, you scored really high. You can join our Prometheus Society, which is 99.997. I mean, it's one of these exclusive IQ groups. And I thought, really? And I thought I was pretty smart, but wait a minute, wow. So and what happened was I didn't learn anything new. All of a sudden, I viewed myself in a different light. I viewed myself as a smart person. I'm capable. I have a brain. I'm not a put down. I'm not a worm. I'm not a sinner. I'm not a bad guy. I actually, maybe I don't have all the answers and maybe I never will, but I've got a good brain and I'm going to use it. I'm going to respect it wherever it leads. And I remember there was a sort of self-esteem thing that happened. It was like, I don't have to submit to the dictator, to the Lord. I don't have to bow down as a humble servant. I can think this thing through on my own. I got a brain, and why not? So I think that's what's lacking in a lot of religious people is the confidence in their own reasoning abilities. They just don't think they're good enough. They bought into this idea that they are bad, and you're not going to figure it out. Think as much as you want. You're never going to be as smart as the theologians. So just take their word for it. You know what I mean? And so inside of my own brain, it was kind of a waking up of, I'm going to do this. I'm going to think this. I'm going to wrestle with it, and I'm going to respect myself and follow the path wherever it leads.
Jay,
that's great advice.
Yeah.
If you ask away.
Friend of mine, his name Aziz Al-Baz, he's in jail under blasphemy law. So do you think blasphemy law is a new arm against free thinkers and atheists?
I didn't get most of that.
Yeah, I know what she's
I
asking.
think you think blasphemy law it's a new weapon against atheists and free thinkers?
Yeah, she's asking, is the blasphemy laws, are they like a new weapon to use against atheists and free thinkers?
Oh yeah. You mean Assis is put in jail? Yeah. Well, yeah. Blasphemy laws have historically tried to shut down dissent. and that's why we should oppose them.
Okay. There was one question I want to ask. Have you, like with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, have you had any international calls where they're asking just for advice or help on any issues?
Yes, we do, but we can't do anything about it except to compare with our own country. We have a First Amendment here that has a clause in it called the Establishment Clause.
Yeah.
That's keeping our organization alive. It is that establishment clause of our own First Amendment in our Bill of Rights. Other countries don't have that. Canada has something called a Charter of Rights, and the UK has something, doesn't really have anything like that. So you have to attack them in different ways.
Yeah.
But I think blasphemy is blasphemy, and government is government, and so you can still push for fairness in your own country. We are a member of the Atheist Alliance International, and we care about international issues, and we travel a lot. Last year we were in Australia, Philippines, Germany, Mexico, different countries, because it's the same human race over the whole planet. So the issues are the same, but the laws are different. So that's what's the problem.
Yeah. Just as an extension to that, are you involved also in the? You're probably aware the UN, especially the Muslims, are trying to push for some kind of international standard on blasphemy. Are you actively involved in opposing that as well? Like,
we are not actively involved.
No.
We report it in our newspaper.
Yeah.
And we support the groups. For example, in Ireland, they're having a big issue with blasphemy in Ireland, and so we report on it, but we can't do anything legally at this point. Maybe when we get to 100,000 members, maybe we could spend some time on those things.
Like, yeah, but like this one specifically within the UN, you haven't thought about maybe, I don't know how you could get involved with these kind of things in the UN.
Well, maybe we could. I don't know how yet.
All right, okay. And Marty or Jay, did you have a question there?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You said the rationalism give me joy, and I like this statement because a lot of religious people think we don't have a joyful life without religions, but they are wrong. We have joyful life without religions. Just the fear from religions and the religions how it punish not believer, that make us not joyful. What do you think about that?
I think you're right, Jay. I think we non-religious people have real joy in the real world. Most religious people have a fake joy, a phony joy, a joy that comes from bowing your head and raising your hands before the Lord, and you feel this feeling of submission to the authority, and then you call that joy. That's not real joy. That's the kind of joy that they feel in North Korea right now when they are bowing down before the dictator, that they're pleasing the father figure. But we natural human beings know that joy is biological. We have biological brains. We have feelings in our brain. We have emotions. We have the cerebellum where drugs can give a certain feeling of ecstasy in that. And we even know that the human species gets a very slight drug kick from doing good deeds, from altruism. When you help somebody, there's a good feeling that comes to you. So I think real joy comes from solving real problems in the real world, whatever they are, whatever problems you're trying to solve. Have you ever solved a problem and then you get this feeling of yes? You know what I mean? I had a problem and now it's fixed. There's a real joy that comes from that. And then, of course, the joy of family.
I know.
Then family and love and friendship and nature and music and art and dance and science and reading, the joy that comes from all of that is a very real thing. It's not phony. It's just, it doesn't last forever. And Bertrand Russell said, why does happiness have to last forever? Happiness is just as happy even if it doesn't last forever. And somebody else said, I think it was Dr. Zeus or maybe someone else, said, don't be sad because it's over. Be glad because it happened. You got to live your life, and that's joyful.
Okay, there was another few questions in the chat room, and someone they were asking, like, how do you respond to like the stigma that's attached to the word atheist? You know, because some people, I notice that quite a lot, they use it in like a very negative way.
Yeah. Well, I used to preach that it was a bad word. I think atheist is a description. That's all it is. I don't think it has to be a label. It just describes a person who does not have a belief in a God. There are a lot of atheists who don't call themselves atheists. They're just, we can just describe them as atheists. For example, I'm a male, I'm not a female. And that's a description of who I am. But I wouldn't put a big capital M on my shirt to label myself as, you know what I mean? It's to take a description and turn it into a label, as if, like with Methodist or Jewish or Muslim, I mean, like a label. Atheism is not that kind of a thing. It's not a label. I think atheism is a very useful but temporary word. I think someday we might not even need the word. We only need it because there's theism in the world. So by contrast, we are the people who are not theists. We are atheists. It's kind of like the word suffragist. Remember when women were struggling to get the vote? They were called suffragists. But today we don't need the word suffragist. That problem has been solved in most countries. And so no woman walks around today calling herself a suffragist. And I think someday in the future, nobody's going to walk around calling themselves an atheist, because theism won't be a problem anymore. And so we don't need the word. But for now, temporarily, while we still have the problem of the majority of the population are theists, for now the word atheist has some meaning. And I think in our current culture, it's a kind of sexy meaning. It's a kind of edgy thing to say in today's culture. Maybe 100 years from now, it won't be. But right now, I think we should make good use of the word atheist while it still has that stigma to it, and be proud about it and use that word for social and even for political purposes.
Yeah. Okay,
I have a question about your daughter, Sabrina. Yes, her name? How you can lead her and open the door for her to free thinkers' world?
Well, Annie Laurie, my wife, Sabrina's mother, is a third generation free thinker. She never went to church, maybe once or twice with her friends, you know. And their family came out just fine with no religion. The mother even gave her a Bible. She said, maybe you should read this to learn what your friends believe. And so she read some of it. And so our daughter Sabrina is very lucky. She's raised in a family with no religion, but she's free to think what she wants. She's free to argue with us and win the argument. She doesn't have to be just like us. So she has no religious belief. And when we talk about religion, she just laughs. She snickers, you know, it's like silly to her. And so we were not, it's not like we were having atheist Sunday school. Every Sunday get together and make her memorize Charles Darwin and Bertrand Russell. You know what I mean? It wasn't free to be herself and learn, and she listens to us. And so, you know, look at Denmark right now. In Denmark, only about 4% believe in a God. But yet it's a happy, functional society with good health care and good women's rights and, you know, good quality of life. So you don't need religion to have a good, moral, happy life.
So we're just coming up to the end. There's only 4 minutes left. So I think, Dan, you can have a little bit of a soapbox moment and promote anything anything you really want to promote. And over to you, Dan.
Today I sent out that tweet because it's Easter, that if Jesus knew how many people don't believe in the resurrection, he would roll over in his grave.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it is.
We can make light of religion, and we're all different. You and I have different skills, different interests, and we're not a church, we're not a religion, nobody has to think the same. Atheism is a bottom-up thing, not top-down. Most religions are top-down. There's a Vatican or a denomination, and people fit into this thing above them. But atheism is organic from the bottom up. Each atheist does their own thinking. Each atheist has their own free thoughts. And that's the beauty of it. We've come together anyway. We don't even have to. We don't have to organize. We don't have a creed. We don't have a dogma. But we just love being human beings free from the illness of religion.
Okay, I think we can wrap it up there, everybody. A big thank you for Dan Barker for taking the time out. It's been a fascinating conversation. So thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
And we are back next week at a regular time of 6 p.m. BST, and that's 2 p.m. Eastern time. And our guest is the establishment clause lawyer and political activist Eddie Tabash. Have you heard of him, Dan?
Yes, I know Eddie very well.
All
We're
right,
good
so,
friends.
yeah, so that's who we've got on next week, back to our regular time. So thank you, a big thanks to the guests as well. Thank you to everyone turning up at our new location. It's gone fantastically well, and we'll see you all next week. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.